Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Walter Sommers. I'm born and raised in the city of Frankfurt, Germany on December 29, 1920. It was a very bad time. It was right after the end of World War One. The fact was there was no milk for me, so my father, having been born and raised in the country, had to put a cow in the basement of our city apartment so that I could have milk. As it was, he shared the milk with two other families who were living in the same building, so nobody minded the smell of the cow. Also, we had chickens in our backyard for several years, and that provided us with eggs. There was a tremendous food shortage uh, all over Germany. In 1923, there was a terrible inflation, and people had to go shopping for groceries with bags of paper money. And if they didn't spend it all on the same day, it would buy less the next day. Unemployment was tremendous. All this was the result of the Treaty of Versailles that was signed under duress in February 1919. In fact, President Woodrow Wilson, who was at the meeting at the time in Versailles, at the in Paris, he said, "Here are the seats for World War II." Germany was blamed for starting the war, which is not exactly true. It was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire who started the war with Serbia. Unfortunately, Germany agreed that they would go along with them. But the war was fought on French and Belgian soil for 4 years, so it is difficult to see how Germany, how it could be said that Germany lost the war. Not a single shot had been fired on German soil, quite different from World War II, where the German army had been utterly destroyed by American and English forces. Unemployment was tremendous. I remember that people would come to our house begging for food, and I also recall coming home from school and I would find strangers sitting in my mother's kitchen and she would feed them. People would come by the house and sing for pennies. All that changed in 1933, January 30th, 1933. Prior to that, Germany had a very nice democratic government. It's called the Weimar Republic, but there was one thing wrong. They had 17 political parties. And they didn't get very much done, unfortunately. The leaders of these parties were people who came from very wealthy families in Germany, or were people who had been high up in the German army prior to World War One, or there were people that were very much involved with the Catholic Church, and as a result, they did not really realize the needs of the unemployed and what needed to be done to put people back to work. Meanwhile, a party had been formed called the National Socialist Workers' Party by Adolf Hitler. That party was originated in the beer halls of Munich in the winter of 1919. And the Jews were blamed for just about everything bad that was happening. Hitler, who was born and raised in a small town of Austria, had never met a Jewish person until he came to Vienna, where he was trying to get an education in art and painting. But unfortunately, he was a high school dropout, so he had to take an examination. And as it was, he failed very badly. It was at that time that he became aware that there were some students who did very, very well, but they looked different to him. They were tall people with black beards, wearing big black hats, and he would say, "Who are these people?" And he was told, "These are Orthodox Jewish people from Poland." And it was here where Hitler, who had never met a Jewish person before, became violently anti Semitic. After Hitler founded the National Socialist Party in Munich, anti Semitism became his guiding principle, and Jews were blamed for all of the bad economic situation in Germany, and in fact, he even blamed world Jewry for starting World War One. On January 30th, 1933, there was another election, and the Nazi Party got 33% of the vote. Since there were 17 political parties, Socialists got about 22%, Communists about 17%, and then there were several other smaller nationalistic and social parties got small percentages. As it was, within a few days, the Reichstag, which is the equivalent of our Capitol building, happened to burn down. Fortunately, Hitler did not blame Jews for that, but he blamed the communists. Now the various parties, the 17 political parties, had no place to meet anymore. And it was here that Germany turned from a viable democracy, the Weimar Republic, into a terrible dictatorship, patterned very much after Mussolini's dictatorship in, in Italy. Within a few months, they decided a book burning. Books written by socialist and communist authors uh, and Jewish authors were thrown on a heap and burned. Unfortunately, this only happened in selected cities, mainly in Berlin and in Munich and in various other larger cities. And as a result, I was not aware of this, and I did not learn about this until several years later after I immigrated to the United States. Fast forward, in 1935, the Nazis declared that only pure Aryan people could be citizens of Germany. Uh, Everybody else had to be a subject. My family had a history dating back to 1789, and they only knew one country, and that was Germany. My father only spoke German, my mother spoke some French and some English, and good Christian friends and neighbors would tell my parents that this was only temporary, that eventually things would get better and persecution of Jewish people uh, would stop. Uh, there was a boycott of Jewish retail stores starting right away in 1933, and eventually it had its effects, and many Jewish merchants had to go out of business. Corporations were forbidden to hire Jewish employees, and so uh, for Jews in Germany, life started to become very difficult. In 1938, there was the Nazis decided that Austria should become part of Germany. The economy in Germany was quite good. The economy in Austria was bad, so the Austrians were very happy to be part of Germany. And the world stood by. Nothing was done about it. So since that went so very easy, uh, Hitler decided that he wanted a meeting with delegates of France and England in the summer of 1938, and he demanded that part of the Czech Republic, where German-speaking people lived, called Sudeten Germans, that part of Czechoslovakia should become part of Germany. Although the France and England had a treaty, a non-aggression pact treaty with all of Czechoslovakia, they agreed that Hitler should take that part of the Czech Republic, and the world stood by once again. Fast forward, the next event was November 9th, 1938. The event is called Kristallnacht. Can I have a drink of water?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Is this about what you had in mind? Yeah.
You're perfect.
Kristallnacht, also in German called Kristallnacht, was the major event that uh, uh, brought anti-Semitism in Germany to a major climax. In October 1938, Hitler discovered that there were some Jewish people who had immigrated from Poland to Germany right after World War One, and somehow they had never gained, or rather regained, German citizenship. These people had lived in a part of Poland that was formerly Germany, but under the Treaty of Versailles, that part of Germany had to be turned over to the Polish government. There was so much anti-Semitism in Poland that these people decided to leave. There were about 35 or 40,000 individuals. Hitler decided that these people should be given 48 hours to get on sealed trains. And these trains were taken to the Polish border. But Poland decided, since these people had left in 1919, 1920, that they should not be permitted to re-enter Poland. And so the train stood in no man's land for several days. People got sick, people died. Some well-meaning Catholic Polish people brought some drink and some food, but it was not enough. The son of one of the victims, living in Paris, France, became so enraged he got himself a gun and took a shot at a German embassy official in Paris. Well, Hitler said, I am not going to permit these damn Jews going around and shooting our ambassadors. So a revenge was organized, and the event is called Kristallnacht, or which happened on November 9th, 1938. At the time, I was working as an apprentice. I was only 18 years old at an export-import company in the city of Hamburg, Germany. And on my way home, it was shortly after 5, with another apprentice, a Christian boy. We saw shards of glass all over the street, and we saw dirty mobs of people with crowbars and sledgehammers smashing the display windows of retail stores belonging to Jewish merchants, throwing merchandise out in the street. We observed that police was standing by doing nothing. Some stormtroopers in brown uniforms stood around laughing. That kind of told us what was going on. We very carefully maneuvered our bicycles through these glass charged ruined streets, and a little bit further north, on our way home, we noticed that a synagogue had been set afire. The fire department was trying to put out the fire, but was prevented by stormtroopers from doing so. A German citizen went inside the synagogue and retrieved the Torah to prevent it from burning down. During that evening, they burned down some 250 synagogues all over Germany. And I'm happy to say I've been back in Germany 3 times. They have rebuilt about 200. But we visited one or two of these rebuilt synagogues, and every time we learned from the tour director, the synagogue has been rebuilt, but we don't have any Jewish people praying in them. So that was the result of Kristallnacht. Also during that night, they went around and arrested 30,000 Jewish men, and unfortunately that included my father. They may have tried to look for me, but they couldn't find me, and I went free. I stayed with friends who happened to have Romanian citizenship, and they were left alone because Romania was a good ally of Nazi Germany. Fortunately, my parents who did not want to leave Germany. Germany was our family home since the 18th century. We didn't know any other country. Uh, but fortunately, they had decided that we should leave and come to America, which was difficult because you had to go in under a definite annual quota, and in addition to this, you had to have a living relative who would vouch for you financially. And for a long time, for several years, we were not aware of having such a family member. Eventually, they did find a second cousin once removed, and he gave our family an affidavit. And so we were able to come to America in January 1939. That was a happy event. We came dirt poor. My parents had lost just about everything, but they were permitted to take all their furniture, even silverware and books and what have you along, but hardly any currency, hardly any money. So that was the that was our coming to America. I want to briefly point out what kind of a reception we got. We traveled on a small Dutch ship called the Veendam, and aboard our ship were some German Nazis with swastikas in their lapel. Upon arriving in Hoboken, New Jersey, the American immigration official asked that the Nazis should come off first, and they were welcomed with open arms, and hardly any questions were asked. Meanwhile, the rest of us, there was three other Jewish families and our family, and they appointed me to be there to speak for them, since most of the others knew very little English. And the questions were my, whether my father had ever been a member of the Communist Party. Well, my father was a merchant, and that that wouldn't have been possible for him to be a member of the Communist Party. And the other question was whether my father had ever attempted to overthrow the Nazi government. Those were the questions asked by an American immigration official. In fact, a few months later, our bicycles over the Hudson River, over, over the George Washington Bridge, from Manhattan over to New Jersey. And I arrived in Teaneck, New Jersey, and I saw a group of German Americans in Nazi uniforms with swastika armbands waving a Nazi flag. And it was at that time that I was not sure whether we had made a wise decision to come to America. Fortunately, I was able to get a job within 2 days, but it only paid $11 a week. Of course, the dollar bought a lot more than it does today. Subway rides in New York City at that time were 5 cents from the tip of Manhattan to the beaches in Brooklyn. My parents succeeded in finding a 2-bedroom apartment in the uptown area of Manhattan, fifth floor walk up for $52 a month. I imagine it's probably around $900 or $1,000 today. That was our start. My job was with a fabric house. These people sold fabric to manufacturers who were making ladies' sleepwear and ladies' bed jackets. And they had some remnants laying around that had slight damages, and they told me that they had no value. Fortunately, I had taken with me the names and addresses of some manufacturers of doll clothing and other items in Mexico City, and I told them that I might be able to find a market for them. And they put me to work immediately, and also I had good ability to type, and I knew some Spanish, and so I was able to earn myself a few extra dollars. Now, I want to talk about the only time that I've been discriminated against for being Jewish in America, and that happened to be in the summer of 1939. Since I was only being paid $11 a week, and I saw an ad in the New York Times that advertised a job at an export-import company and promising to pay $18 a week, I applied for the job. And they asked me to sit down and fill out some forms. And they needed somebody who spoke German, but also knew some Spanish, and of course spoke English. And I was quite well qualified for that. And they said, "You are extremely well qualified. However, we have to ask you one question." And the question was, they needed to know where my parents went to church. And when I told them that they were attending services at a small Jewish synagogue in uptown Manhattan, I could tell by the facial expression of the gentleman who conducted the interview that he was not happy to hear that. He excused himself and came back a moment later and handed me a dollar bill and thanked me for applying for the job. But he also told me that somehow, while I was well qualified for the job, I would not fit in properly. And this was actually the only time in my life that I had been discriminated against. Uh, Somehow I escaped discrimination in Germany, in Nazi Germany, except that I was forbidden to go to swimming pools and attend movie theaters. But then my Christian friends said, if you can't go, we don't go. So it didn't bother me too much. But not to be but to be denied a job because I was Jewish, that that impacted me very, very much. Well, a couple of years later, war broke out, and I volunteered for the American Army, even though I was not a citizen. And I have never. I was sent to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, um, to the Field Artillery School. I was an artilleryman during World War II. I was a member of the 77th Infantry Division in Field Artillery, and I saw action in Guam, in on Leyte, on the island of Leyte, uh, and two or three other islands in the Philippines, and finally in Okinawa. Uh, it was a tough war, but somehow I felt very, very good about being an American and being able to do my part and serve. Enough? Okay.